Hi, everyone. First of all, I'm just going to take a selfie with all of you because my mother doesn't believe that this community is this big. So please help me here. Raise up, do something. It's for my mother. So, validation. A little bit about me. I'm Caneco. I'm a full-stack developer, one of those unicorns, working on a health company, Medicare, back in Portugal. And this is my normal stack, so I work with all these file extensions. I've been known as being, it's not an official title, I'm kind of the Nuno Maduro's sugar. So I've been working with him, making the logos for Laravel 0, Collision, you might have heard of it, and most recently PHP Insights, and even more recently Pest. Check that out. So I'm from Lisbon, Portugal, and I learned this geography by Mr. Miyagi. So bear with me. So you can look at your hand. So you got Netherlands here, so you got Spain here, Portugal here. It's good? Okay. So a little bit of warning, these slides might help you with your validation on not only in code, but UI UX. All the GIFs are for Cobra Kai. You might check that TV show, is awesome. And all of the sites, this is purely Keynote here. So let's get ready. So why do we validate? For example, on a regular day in this year, these many tweets happen every single day. These many emails are sent. These many searches are made. These many posts are made on Laracast. And these many downloads are made on spicy packages. So there's a lot of data being back and forth from everywhere. I mean a lot. So either be through APIs or in forums. But data is passing on between servers and users and wherever. So, but do you really need it? Should or could we trust our users? Most definitely, right? Yeah. But it's just purely out of fun. We do the validation, right? So bury that idea. So, validation 101. What's validation? So imagine this simple form. So when you try to submit, there's the request to a server, but no data was in the input fields. So we just make a request out of nothing. But why? This was pretty much our HTML code. What could we add there that could help prevent that tiny request? So let's just add required there, plain simple. So next time that we try to sign in, at least a tooltip will appear, preventing the user to go forward. But if we type not only an email, that's obviously not an email, right? So if you try to sign in, but the request goes either way, and it actually checks the database for nothing. So why not just actually see if it's actually an email address in the input field? So just type text from email at least, and then a new tooltip will appear saying that that's not an email address. And if you try to keep typing and say that it is not an email address, but if I add this, it's not an email address, it won't work, right? Oh, but it did work. It did went through the server. So, okay, what we can do, so we can add a pattern there. At least in the input password, we might doing what? Maybe adding a min length. And why not making, I want a super secure password, just grabbing there a regex, and that's it. So that's it, pretty much. That could be a smaller validation part, but not exactly. So we just saw how to validate through HTML5. And HTML5 validation is a little bit dependent on the browser. It's modern these days, everyone has it, a modern web browser, but still, it's not that simple or pretty. I mean, this compared to what we are more used to, like the Laravel validation part, it's not that pretty what you have. So what you can have, so maybe with JavaScript, that tiny thing that most of you are afraid of it, maybe you can do a little something with that. But before we use JavaScript, we need to add one tiny thing on our form. So say for the form to don't validate as is expected to, just go with our validation. So we can use jQuery validate, still modern-ish. So if it was with jQuery validate, we just set up our rules in there, just tangle on the form, and that's it. That's how jQuery validate works. It's magic. Sorry, Kai. And then, or if you are more a vanilla flavor, you can go vanilla and use validate.js, maybe. And pretty similar, you can gather information, and then you need to really type all the JavaScript code in there, and then set up our rules, and then put it on the validation. So it's a little bit hacky. But there's another kid in a block, so if you all of you like Vue, this is my #1 top favorite. And for that, you just need to install it. Pretty simple. You need to import it, setting up, and in the input field, you just need to add a V model, obviously, and you just add vValidate in there. Why don't we explicit say that you should validate like an email or required? Because vValidate uses the input attributes uses the attributes from the input tag to actually check what is sort of the field to validate. But if me personally, I don't like it, so I just remove that entirely, and then I can move this to the vValidate. And you might seem that it's pretty familiar, like we have in Laravel. Continue on, you have a bunch of validations preset with vValidate. Pretty much most of them are mimicking the Laravel validation ones, and you can even add your own, pretty simple. To add your own, you just need to import the validator. You need to, in this case, for example, like getting the rejects from another file, and you just set up this object. You set your get message. For example, if the validation fails, what message should I show to the user? And then you say what's the validation formula that you need for that validation. And then you extended the validator. Pretty darn simple. And then you just use it, and that's it. And pretty much like Laravel, it has its own error bag. And we all love error bags. And to using them, for example, you have a label because you want to add some styling on that label. So you just pretty much very common on Vue, you just add your classes if the errors as the error on that input field. And you can either type manually your message, or you can get it from that message function from the previous object. So in this case, when you try to sign in using vValidate, when you try, it gets that styling pretty simple, and that message from the vValidate, it shows up real simple. And Errorbag has a good API to check if there's any error, to get all the errors, to count, clear, whatever. But you start thinking, oh, darn, this is very too much. But why do we really need to validate the information on the client? Yeah, because you want to pretty much make sure that the data is good before going to the server. You can give your users a quick feedback, actually, and real-time feedback. So the users see right away, instead of sending a message and waiting for the loading page, you see right away if the information is good. And it reduces the validation from your server. Imagine if you're having 1,000 users on your server. Instead of validating 1,000 requests on your server, those 1,000 requests are made individually in every user computer. So it frees up your server a little bit of validation of that use. Now on the server side, and you might, okay, but didn't I just do the validation on the client side? I need to do it again on the server side? Yeah. You need to reassure that the data is good. And in most of the cases, you have server-side checking. I mean with this is, most of the times, you need to validate some stuff that you can actually only do on server side. And maybe it's some domain rules that you got from your application that you can only check on the server side. For example, to check if the user is unique or not. So, this is more familiar with you. So you have here a pretty simple validation made on Laravel using the validator. And this is the typical message that the server receives. But we are trying to use like an Ajax recall. So we're trying to get information from the server and try to handle it. But this is a little bit weird. How can I check, or how, even if there's many errors with this entire information, entire sentence there, so do I need to test, check, make a regex to check the text in there, trying to find which error it happened? How to simplify the conversation between server and client? So you can make a submit request, random name in there, and you can set up your rules. But here is the magic. Sorry, Kai again. So you can set up these tiny trigger words that you can later then use to check from JavaScript. So, and you, instead of using the validation error message from Laravel, that is normal, you can set up your custom exception, and instead of using the 422 exception error, you can use the 418, and that's, I'm a teapot, I don't know. It's really weird. So you can get this message from the server instead of that one. So you have an array of errors that, in this case, was email that was invalid. And with that 418 error HTTP error status code, you can, oh shoot. It will make it a lot easier along the way to find it from JavaScript. So that's it. You just make the best interface to connect between server and client. Wake up. Validation examples. I'm going to show two examples. So first one is an email field, a normal email field, that if you try to submit, now your revalidates, checking if it's some information in there, it fails. Or if it's not a proper email, so that validation works too. But how to prevent the errors to happening? Maybe it won't be easier or better for the users to actually know that it's supposed to be an email address instead of waiting for the user to click the submit button. So why not? And even this stuff happens. So the user are typing their email address, and they just type out the email, so this happens. The user make mistakes. So why not just popping up a new message, appearing, say, oh, did you mean Hotmail? And then if the user clicks it, then switch up for the actually true email address. Or if the user typed just the @ symbol, why not just opening a pop-up drop-down with all the possible or more common email addresses on the list, and then if the user clicks one, it just goes back. So why not making the life of the user a little bit easier instead of making the errors to actually happen, and then to handle it? Then, for example, receiving that information from the client. Imagine that I use this email address. So that domain, it doesn't exist. So if I try to submit it, it'll actually go through because the validation handle for email, it just checks if the email is correct or not. But thanks to the newest release of Laravel, made last week, I guess, it has two different options to validate the email address. So you can check for the actual format correct and to check if the DNS exists. So, and you can add up your validation to check if the user exists on a database. But those two together, I'm making here a tiny mistake. So I'm sending an email address, and I'm checking right away if the DNS exists. And if it passes, then if it fails, it goes to my database. So why not? There's one tiny thing from Laravel validation that you might all forget about it, that is bail. That is, if the first validation fails, just discard the rest of it, of the thing. Because imagine going for all those validations, you might just getting your server loaded. Remember that submit request that we made previously? That gives us this information from the server instead of that one. So imagine that Ajax request. So you can check right away for the HTTP status code instead of the normal 422. We can check right away that is actually validation error that we made from that submit request. And we can check really easy if it's that unique error that we really want to deal with. Then you can add that using the error bag from vvalidate, and you can inject the message for error. And we can add tiny things like having the input field with focus, so it also helps the user continue submitting a good email address. Or if you're using you can make a reference in Vue to make it that easier to make a focus. Phone fields. Phone fields are also important input fields, in my opinion. So you can make your own custom phone validation there. So you can have your regex. This, for example, just checks if the phone has 9 numbers. And in Portugal, we have this sort of validation, so we can even check if the phone has the correct format for accepting it before you can send it to the server. So this phone number won't work because it doesn't have the right format from a phone number back in Portugal. But again, we want to prevent the errors to happening instead of let the user handle the error. So imagine that the user just playing around. So if I want a number with 9 digits, why the heck do I let the input field to have this many numbers? And mostly, why do I letting the user typing letters on an input field that should only accept numbers? So what could I add here? First of all, I can add the max length. So at least I'm limiting already the user to only accept 9 digits from submitting in the input field. Then I can add this tiny library for vmasking. So I can help right away the user how to actually input the data in my input field. So like the vvalidate is really easy to initialize. You just need to import the plugin Vue and vmask and let Vue know that you want to use it. And that's it, pretty much that configuration. And then when you add the vmask attribute, the fair comment on using Vue, you just say that you want 9 digits, that one cardinal means 1 digit, and you can even make it prettier for the user and even help the user trying to find So it will help the user checking the phone number. But make sure that if you add spaces, add them on the max length. So when the user trying to typing the phone number, so it will help the user see the phone number in preventing again that error. And this could be done for zips, for even numbers, for addresses, or for checking the weight, whatever. So pretty much, they follow the same idea, how to handle, using vValidate and vMask. I'm not going to follow every example, because it also depends on your use cases in your application, but they all follow the same idea. So you're done, but you need to wax on, wax off a little bit, so you need to practice a little bit, try to use these ideas, try to practice a little bit, but you will have the hang of it. Some extra tricks for you guys. Autofocus. This is a little bit not used, I believe, but imagine that a user just opens up your form address just for login or trying to submit, and you just need to add this tiny attribute in your input field, and when the user opens the page, the first field that you want for them to start typing, it's already been selected. So the user don't need to click the input field and then start to typing. It will help your users. But make sure that you make some attention in using autofocus on mobile. Because on a desktop, if you add an input field with focus, no problem there. But if you add on a phone, when you click or the user opens up the page, it shows up right away the keyboard. It's very common, right? But the user, for that moment alone, it won't be seeing half of your screen. And all of your form and the user will be a little bit weird and might be lost. So make sure that you only use this on desktop. So for that, you can switch autofocus and create our own directive on view. Something real simple like this. Set if it's different than mobile, so just add autofocus. If not, just use it. Let the user focus from the touch. Input types. Previously, we've been using the types with email for input fields, and then when we go from vValidate, we just remove the type email and go back to text. That's because some vValidate and some other libraries might be a little bit weird and buggy with these sort of types, but they're really helpful on mobile. So imagine that I'm using type email. In a normal input field, what could happen? I was expecting that was like a normal text keyboard, but it actually, if you change up to type email, it shows this keyboard. Wasn't that the same thing? Not entirely. So it shows up two different buttons in there. One's for the @ sign, that will help the users right away select the @ symbol and try to type the rest of the email. You have also the type tell. The type tell shows up this keyboard. This will be a lot easier for the user and will say right away the user that I want a number, not a text. And you have also the number that actually shows the first line of a number and shows the rest of the keyboard like that. And you might think, so imagine that you have the phone number field. So if I add number there, makes sense. And then I add max length of a 9. But actually, due to HTML5, the max length is entirely invisible for that input field. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work entirely. So there's a new thing that is really fresh that's called input mode. That is not yet been available in every browser, but as far as we can see, you can already use it. And it's fairly the same like a text. But instead, you just set input mode as a number, and you can use it either way with tel, URL, email, or you can have a new one called decimal. And that's what you do. It's the input mode sets what keyboard that you want for that input. And you still can use the type text that could be buggy with some libraries like vvalidate or vmask. And that decimal, the new guy, actually has this keyboard with a dot in there that's rather different than the tel. Another one that you might not be using it that much is placeholder, or you've been using it, but you might be using a little bit not as good. You might actually use it like this, and then the user start typing. What was typing? I totally forgot. Then a user erases what they just typed. Oh, it's my full name. So I just typed my full name. And we want to prevent the Dory syndrome. So the users forget really quick what they are doing because they are in a hurry. They want to check out Twitter. So users forget really quick. So what you can do instead is this. You might seen it around the place on Stripe, for example, is that floating label. The label, it actually floats on top of the input field. And then you can actually even use it, the label, as for reference for the errors if it happen. And I actually like to use this approach is when you're trying to type your email, then you can use your placeholder to help the users to know the format of what you want in that input. So now you're ready for the fight. Now get your computers and start validating really good. But first, I want to help me again with another stuff. There's a motto on Karate Kid. I make a similar one. You need to validate first, remember? Validate back and show no mercy. So if you can all together say with me, I'm just going back to the slide, say with me. No, we're back again. Let's give another round. This one is big. So thank you.